Lovell was proposing that the third only ever flight of the Saturn V would go with 3 men who were fathers and husbands, and it wouldn't go just 100 miles into Earth orbit, or even 853 miles above the Earth, which was the current world altitude record, but 240,000 miles away to our most ancient companion, the moon. If that's not bad enough, they're going to go without the lunar module. Remember, that's the whole idea behind Lowe's epiphany. But the lunar module has a very special secondary function, and that is as a backup engine. So if anything goes wrong with the primary engine that Apollo 8 is going to take to the moon, there's going to be very big trouble for the astronauts, especially if they're already in lunar orbit. They will never be able to get out. They could crash into the lunar surface, remain in lunar orbit for thousands of years, or fly off into eternal solar orbit. That engine has to work, and it has to work perfectly. Maybe even worst of all, they're going to go at the end of this terrible year, 1968. Separate from the Civil War years, maybe the worst year in our country's history. Still, Chris Kraft thinks if we could pull this off, think of what this means. We could keep the president's promise to the country alive, and we have an outside chance of beating the Soviets to the moon. And what could be better than that? So they call Jim's predecessor, Jim Webb, who's in Vienna at a conference, and they call him on a secure line. They don't want the Soviets hearing this, and they pitch the plan to him. And he listens to them, and then he says, and this is a direct quote, "Are you out of your minds?" And he goes through the risks, and he reminds them of another risk. He says, if anything happens to these men, anything, poets, lovers, no one will ever look at the moon the same again. The people at NASA had not thought of that, but it was true also of Christmas, because of course, Lowe's plan called for the astronauts to be in lunar orbit on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day at the end of the worst year in our country's history. So that's how the plan got started and what the context was. And with that, if I could ask some of the players in Apollo 8 some questions, I'd be grateful for the answers. Jim Lovell. The crew of Apollo 8 had very different reactions to the change in mission from an Earth orbital flight to a lunar orbital flight. Frank Borman, as soon as he heard they had a chance to go to the moon, was all for it. He had joined NASA for a single reason, that was to defeat the Soviets in space, and this was his chance. Bill Anders at first was very discouraged. He believed he had an 80% chance of walking on the moon, but now that the lunar module was taken out, he believed his chances had slipped to 0. What was your reaction when Frank came back from Houston and said you'd be going to the moon?
I was delighted. Actually, Frank, when he found out about going to the moon, was merely to go around the moon, circumnavigate to beat the Russians. He had no interest in exploration. I thought this was going to be a mini Lewis and Clark expedition, and I really thought this was the way to see new territory, do new things, and see the far side of the moon.